All right, I see the recording has started. That's a good sign. We're not quite seeing slides yet.
Yep. For some reason, it's taking a while to load, but it should be there in a sec.
It's on its way. Well, while we're waiting for the intro slide, I can start talking because we don't want to take too much time away from the main point of the show today. But I want to welcome everyone to today's DWG Institute Technology Exchange, where we'll be hearing from our partner Unily about automating employee onboarding. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrea Brandt. I'm a member advisor at DWG, and I'm joined today by Nancy Goebel, who is our, oh, Rose, are we able to move the slides? There we go. I'm here with Nancy, and Nancy's our Deputy CEO. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Andrea. I'm joining you from a brisk New York City area where we're hoping to have a sign of spring a little bit later today. Hope all is well.
Yes, well, welcome. And we've also got folks from Unily on the call with us today. But before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to see. So I mentioned while we were getting started that we're going to be talking about automating employee onboarding. And what's unique about today's session is not only will you get to see the technology that Unily has built to help automate that for its customers, but we will be hearing about how Unily themselves put themselves under the microscope to build that technology. So we'll be hearing from Kaz Hassan, who was instrumental in researching and designing the functionality. He'll tell us a little bit about the backstory. He'll show us a demo, and then of course we'll have time to answer questions. So let's get started. Rose, can you give people the tips and tricks of how to get the most out of today's session?
Yes, thanks so much. So just a couple of viewing options for you here. On my screen, you'll see some options. You can click on the 3 dots and then the drop-down menu. And you'll also find the option to show transcription as we're audio transcribing these events. So if you'd like to view the transcript, you can do so by clicking on that option. On this screen, you'll also see some handy options for getting involved in today's discussion. So if you would like to input a question into the chat or share an insight or just anything whilst we're going through the session, please do submit those into the chat panel and we'll bring those into the conversation off mute or feed those to our hosts and get those answered for you. If you need any help throughout the session, then please do just message me in the chat or you can email me at that email on screen and I'll help you from there. And just to flag that this is an open session and it's being recorded and all materials presented remain confidential. And just before we head in, I'd love to highlight a few of our externally facing resources from DWG before we introduce Unily. So first, just taking a look at our research report. In this report, we share 7 key takeaways on low-code and no-code solutions, what digital workplace teams need to know. So that is our latest report. And there's just jumping ahead to our podcasts. On the Digital Workplace Impact podcast this week, this was our 100th episode, and we actually invited one of our first guests in to discuss how things have changed since then. So we'll be sharing that in chat, or you can click on screen to have a listen to that later on. Another podcast for you there, that's from our Nature of Work book, looking at themes from the book there, and also just to highlight the Digital Workplace of the Year Awards, which will be taking place on the 7th of June, and that is also an open event, and you are very welcome to join us. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about DWG and how you can get involved as a member, then you can do so by clicking on that button, and I'll share these in the chat as well for you. Thanks so much. I'll hand back to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Rose. And speaking of the chat, we love when the chat panel is lively, and we've got Nancy monitoring the chat panel while we're talking, as well as some folks from Unily who can answer questions. We'd love to take that opportunity to hear from you. Where are you from? Why are you joining us today? And let's get going. So I'd like to introduce Kaz Hassan from Unily, who's going to be the main star of the show today. And Kaz, are you ready to share your screen?
I am ready, and I will take over if that's okay.
Fabulous.
Hopefully it should be just about to come through.
Yes, we are
Cool.
seeing who.
Excellent. So I'll kind of introduce myself a little bit before I go on to Unily. So my name is Kaz, and I'm a product manager at Unily. So what that essentially means is that I design our employee experience platform. It's kind of my job to work with companies and partners like DWG, understand what the digital workplace landscape is looking like, where we want to take employee experience, and try and implement that and bring that to life through a technology perspective. And in particular, one thing that I've been focusing on a lot is how we can support that through automation, or what we call engagement automation. And that's kind of what we'll be tackling today and showing you some examples of as well. So Unily is an employee experience platform where we're a software as a service business. And I'm actually based in London, but we have offices all over the world, including in New York and Australia. Currently, we have about 3.5 million users that are actively using our platform every day. And so we have customers from over 300,000 users down to 10,000 users. So it goes to show that the kind of the variety of types of customers we have in all sorts of different industries as well. And one of the reasons we have that many users is through our success with various different accolades. There's loads I could kind of draw attention to, but the one that I'm probably most proud of is the Nielsen Norman Awards, which, if you haven't heard of them, they specialize in kind of user experience, and every year they will issue their kind of best intranet awards, and we've been performing exceptionally well at that. In 2021, I think we had 5 out of the 10 winners that received Nielsen Norman Awards, all being Unily customers. And it goes to show with flexibility and with configuration that having a really good user experience for your intranet or your digital workplace is really important, and that's something that we're great at doing. So moving on to the topic at hand today, which is all about automating employee onboarding. And before I get into the specifics, I kind of want to explain why it's worth discussing this, and kind of why we wanted to kind of present that. And really it came from trying to listen to some of the challenges that were happening in the digital workplace area and working with some of our customers. And what we noticed was that there was a gap between the technology that marketers and kind of external communicators had to communicate with their customers versus what internal communicators and HR people had to communicate with their employees. And when we did our research, we found that automation was a big part of that gap and a big part of the success with external marketing that internal communicators just didn't have access to. And that kind of research is supported here from HubSpot. And that's essentially why we introduced what we call engagement automation, which is essentially trying to provide that technology to internal communicators and HR managers and IT managers, those that are operating in the digital workplace area, to support them and support employees on moments that matter. And so I worked actively on this technology and worked quite closely with our customers to try and understand what are the moments that matter to them. How can we best fix these challenges? And onboarding was something that comes up time and time again. It's a thing that, especially with the Great Resignation, we know there's lots of turnover. We know onboarding is a critical part of keeping an employee engaged. And the reason automation is a big part of that is because it allows it to be a much smoother process. So when we're talking about automating onboarding, it's not about not making it personal. It's actually really about providing administrators and managers with the ability to plan, schedule, and automate smart campaigns, communication, engagement activities, these sorts of things, all in one smart go. And you see an example here on the screen, the ability to kind of plan out activities. When are you going to publish certain content? How are you going to engage your users? Through what channels? And specifically when it comes to onboarding, so when we looked at that technology, there were a few different use cases that came through. And onboarding was one we wanted to focus on. And one we saw that naturally our customers would want to flex the technology to deal with. And part of that is to do with, we know that companies with good onboarding process improve employer retention and productivity by quite significant amounts. And also in the area of the Great Resignation, which Andrew was talking a little bit about earlier, those that essentially that onboarding period, even pre-boarding as well, before you start, and the first period is so critical in ensuring that an employee is engaged. So employees with an onboarding experience are 18 times more committed to their employer, which is pretty crazy, because when you think about the cost of onboarding someone, and those that work in HR recruitment will know that's quite a heavy cost, to risk not having that level of commitment just from not having a smooth onboarding experience is ultimately expensive and inefficient.
Yeah, and Kaz, I'm wondering, when was this Gallup poll done? Does it account for sort of what I think must be an uptick in just sort of how well your onboarding process takes place when you've got hybrid employees now, or even just in the past 2 years of employees being onboarded to companies having never stepped foot in an office or met their coworkers face to face?
Yeah, so this research is from the latter end of 2020, so it's very recent.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point there as well, because I think we've all heard a lot about hybrid working, and I've definitely seen different companies deal with that onboarding experience in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
We'll hear a little bit about the kind of cultural side of that as well, because I think some people said, okay, well, we need to get certain activities done as part of this, and we need to make them work in a hybrid way. But
Right.
as you say, there's slightly different challenges that come up as well when it comes to remote working and hybrid working.
Yeah. And the timing of having this capability within your solution is phenomenal.
Yeah, so we will, and actually this next one talks to that as well, which is that clearly there's underlying challenges, but it doesn't seem like the employee is necessarily seeing those challenges being met. So
Right.
supported by the same research, only 12% of employees say that their company has a robust onboarding process, and that to me is quite a shocking statistic. Given that it's somewhere, we're hearing a lot about the Great Resignation, and we're hearing a lot about the cost of recruitment and turnover. To hear such a recent statistic of people not feeling that they have a robust onboarding process feels that people should be paying attention to this area.
Absolutely.
And so once we understood from our customers that this was an area that they wanted the technology to work for them in, we saw from the market research that people weren't necessarily getting it right. We kind of tried to combine those two things together to then try and understand at a more detailed level for onboarding, what can we try and fix that increases that percentage and has the best chance of giving that employee success and that they feel connected to the organization. One of the issues that we saw come up was around inconsistency. So quite often where people don't plan out or have control over that onboarding experience, it's completely delegated to departments, or there isn't any centralized organization that is understanding what's going on. It means that people are starting sometimes at the same time but getting different experiences, getting knowledge in one area but not in the other. So you find onboarding employees trying to band together to get the most knowledge, which obviously makes for a fragmented onboarding. There's also this element of it being sometimes too manual, time-consuming tasks, things not being digitalized properly when people have that expectation in consumer experiences. And I guess, and I've had this in a previous company where you go to start and you come with a load of energy and enthusiasm, and then you don't just want to like sit there and hit a stumbling block in week one where it just feels like you're not really doing much, or you're just going through processes that haven't really been thought through or are quite time consuming.
Right. Or you're trying to find somebody who can help you because it hasn't been thought through or is time consuming, but you can't find the right person to even ask the question of.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that, actually, because we come back to that, that kind of people element. And the third point as well is really important, because we've spoken about how onboarding, of course, there are things that need to be done. There are processes that need to be followed, things that need to be signed and agreed to. But there's also, for some companies, quite often a gap when it comes to culture and engagement activities, which is quite often sometimes say, okay, onboarding is a HR process. HR own that process. It's part of their KPIs. They plan out that process. This needs to be done. Woohoo, that's completed. But in reality, there's a huge expectation, especially with certain generations, that they need to feel embedded early on, understand what the culture of the company is, that they enjoy it. And if that isn't done right at the beginning, it often becomes much harder to then integrate yourself later on. And ultimately you feel less of a connection to the company. And talking about, we mentioned kind of how HR is of course critical as part of that, but also understanding again the onboarding experience is from a holistic perspective. You need to understand that the employee is onboarding and that there are multiple boxes that need to be checked. Some are HR boxes, some are IT, some are communications. Of course, the department that they are about to start in will have their own requirements, and trying to understand these building blocks and put them together in a way which makes sense over a journey, over a timeline for that employee is the best way. And that's, we're not seeing that kind of collaboration in onboarding experiences. And lastly, an issue is related to not taking on feedback and not implementing that straight away. Onboarding employees are at the peak of their ability to kind of take in new information, give feedback, say these are the gaps, this is what I didn't learn, this is how this process can be improved. And quite often people are designing that onboarding experience and just leaving it for a year or two.
Or in a vacuum, right? It's like you've got this captive audience that if you could have a mechanism to take that feedback in and continuous improve, tweak the things, because especially if your company is in growth mode, or if you're trying to backfill from a lot of resignations, you've got a consistent onboarding happening. I know, and traditionally these things would take place, every week on a Monday, right?
Exactly.
And how if you've got that kind of churn going through the system, it behooves you to take a look at what's working and what's not, and throw out the bad and keep the good.
Exactly. I know from working in product, we're always trying to kind of incrementally evolve the way we're building stuff, getting ideas. And I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but in reality, it's about being agile. And so implementing those processes into day-to-day employee processes or moments that matter are equally as important in terms of your employee experience, not just about the customer the services that you deliver. And that's really where the automation part comes in. And I want to read this out purely because I think sometimes automation has a bit of a negative connotation. It's a bit like, oh, the robots are taking our jobs. but really, this is much bigger than that, because it's onboarding automation is about trying to streamline the repetitive elements of onboarding for new starters, because we know those things exist, and we know, unfortunately, they have to be done sometimes. But it's about streamlining those things in an efficient way, and basically being able to deliver a set of employee experiences that drive efficiency for those tasks that need to be done, but also engagement. And that engagement part is really key, the efficiency and the engagement, the culture. So the automation is really about providing people with the tools to effectively meet those criteria from day one, and of course before day one too, because we know this journey starts much before then.
Right.
And so here's what we did as a company. So I'm a product person, and working kind of with our HR teams, I need to know I can't just design that product in isolation. It needs to be linked to real world scenarios. And so what I did was started with our HR team, because that's usually where you start when you go with onboarding. Understood what their process was, what it looked like, what needed to be done essentially. Then I kind of had a deeper dive into other parts of the organization. So aside from HR, we know there are IT activities that need to be done. We know there are activities that sit within certain departments, which of course will differ per department, trying to get an idea of the sorts of activities, are there commonalities, but also speaking to recent onboarded employees to say, what was your experience like? What didn't work for you? What did work for you? What would you like to see done differently? And trying to kind of tie this all together. And kind of what I worked out was that the best way to really deliver on this was to, at this point in time, focus on a specific department. So we did sales in our department, and I got one of the reasons we picked sales was because they had the largest quantity of things that needed to be done, and also a large number of employees that they were in the process of onboarding. So it gave me kind of a meaty topic to work with. So I kind of gathered all that information, got all of it, and then what we did was kind of as a collective ultimately designed, not completely away from the technology. We literally mapped out what is our optimum onboarding journey. Literally on a whiteboard, okay, this is what should happen, then this is what should happen. And then what we did was, okay, well, from a technology perspective, what are the gaps we need to try and plug? What functionality will best deliver that in an efficient way, one that's easy for the administrators to build, one that supports people, departments collaborating together. So that's kind of the internal process we've gone through very recently, and you'll see the output of that very soon. But before we do, one of the outputs of that internal process was that we identified kind of 3 elements of employee onboarding, which need focus in themselves. So the first one we've spoken a lot about already, which is mandatory activities. These may come in the form of documents that employees need to read before they start, acceptable use policies, ISO policies, things that they need to read, maybe forms that they need to fill out, ultimately stuff that needs to get done in the onboarding time. The second bucket is related to culture and engagement. This is about the employee feeling connected to the organization generally, understanding the organization's purpose, their values, the leadership, also that they feel engaged to fellow colleagues, employees, managers, that culture and engagement bucket. And then the third bucket is about setting up for success. And this is the more kind of productivity element. So it's ensuring that ultimately the employee has the tools to fulfill their role to the best of their ability, has access to the right tools, the right information, the right people, also that they can use their employee experience platform to make the most of their experience, personalization, ensuring that they're getting the right content delivered to them, really ensuring that they're set up for success. So there are these 3 buckets, and I think if you don't take anything else away from today, it's making sure that when you come back to looking at your employee onboarding experience and you have an opportunity to design that, ensure that all 3 of these buckets are considered, and they should kind of be equally weighted, not just heavily focused on one or the other.
Yeah, I love this. And I can imagine in the conversations that you had with your HR team, your IT team, and then the sales team, each of them had, sort of skewed thoughts probably into one bucket versus another, in terms of importance. But it's great to think of it as, sort of a 3-legged stool, right? If
Yeah.
one of the buckets isn't as full, then the experience isn't going to be as good as it possibly could be.
Yeah, it's funny because the internal process we went through, that when we first obviously started with HR, we were probably talking about 90% in that first bucket. and likewise, the department was probably setting up for success was 90% in that bucket. And what it meant was that, you know, there were cultural and engagement elements that people were considering, but there was a lot of assumed that, oh, you know, the culture and engagement will kind of seep through, but in reality, no one was taking responsibility for that. And so once you were able to kind of understand the aims from onboarding, we were able to kind of call out that bucket and make sure that there was enough focus on that bucket as well.
And Kaz, before we move on, I just want to bring in a question that came in through the chat. It's from, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Laurențiu, who's from Romania and is a senior copywriter who works with a wide mix of organizations and wants to dig a little bit deeper into the Unily context. So Laurențiu, if you could come off mute, and you're welcome to ask your question directly.
I'm sorry, who are you referring to?
The question in the chat that you provided.
Oh, I had no idea I was from Romania and I had that job. I'm sorry.
Oh, there's someone by the same name. Interestingly enough, if you can reintroduce yourself to us, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'm from Estee Lauder Companies and I'm on the IT team. And we obviously support and move forward the Unily platform. So my question here is, how does Unily see themselves in the context of a very large, highly matrixed organization? Is it sort of the source of truth for all onboarding, or is it the front gate and it pulls all the other pertinent enterprise platforms into play to make it a seamless experience?
Good question. Hey, by the way. The kind of way we see not just ourselves, but the employee experience platform generally is that, you know, we know there are an awful lot of tools out there for different types of, especially onboarding, right? We know there are HR tools, HRIS platforms. Generally, we see Unily as kind of the center of the digital estate, and we know that there will be certain key activities from third-party platforms that we would see kind of being part and parcel of the employee experience platform. So if there are repeatable everyday activities that an employee needs to do, we would say there's a good kind of business case to integrate that into the platform. And the same applies for onboarding as well. So if, for example, there might be the, just to take a simple example, inputting, updating information or profile image or something like that, if that's kind of an everyday activity, we'd say like an employee experience platform like Unily should be the center of that, so that the employee onboarding, they shouldn't have to start memorizing, okay, well, there are 5 different platforms that use this platform for this and that platform for that, because that can be a bit overwhelming. So as to the best of your ability, if possible, kind of trying to have a kind of single source of truth and a single platform, at least where you start, would be our aim. Of course, the kind of technicalities of that are sometimes more complex for depending on the tools you use and the amount of tools in your department. But generally speaking, yes, we'd see that platform is the center of that digital estate and where that new onboarding employee should really start their day. Does that answer?
Yeah, somewhat. So is our integration out of the box connectors and integrations something that you're prioritizing for that purpose?
Yes. Exactly. So one thing that this does kind of bring me on nicely to my next slide, actually, which is around like ultimately what are the technology requirements that come off the back of the optimum onboarding experience, and part of that is around the ability for administrators, HR managers, communicators to be able to plan out that experience in a timeline. So kind of taking out some like the paperwork, being able to visualize it in a physical timeline form so you can see what's delivering on day one to that employee in 2 weeks' time, what communications are we sending to them? How will they engage with that communication? What type of comms are we sending? But as you kind of rightly point out, part of what we learned was that different employees have different communication preferences and needs, and part of that involves integrating with different communication channels. So as part of this, we've built into the technology the ability to deliver comms out into different channels, for example, like Outlook, Teams, Slack, and we kind of found that different channels have different purposes. And in our example, we're getting kind of a little bit short on time, so I may have to speed up a little bit. But like we found that for some of the more culture and engagement stuff, like in Unily, we do a lot of our chatting, our calls in Microsoft Teams. And so the best way to kind of get people to engage on more social, cultural engagement type activities is to kind of meet them where they are in Microsoft Teams, send out kind of promotions and notifications into Teams that then get them back into the platform, see what events and culture and events are going on. And likewise, like email has a perception in Unily is for the more like critical stuff. Like if you're kind of need to do some training, you're late with that training, or you've got a mandatory read that you need to be done quickly. That's the right format for that, or the right channel for that. And likewise for different areas of onboarding, like ServiceNow, for example, we have an integration with ServiceNow. We know in the onboarding week that employees have a number of tickets that are set up for them, so they need to be tracking, is their account set up? Have they got their device? These sort of things, and that's kind of where the integrations add value here.
Well, and I love that you've, without sort of overtly saying it, you're saying it, is that, you took a look at within Unily as a company, how culturally does your company operate, and where are those channels that are best engaging for your employees? So I think, people need to take a step back. One size does not fit all. But thankfully, as a software provider, you've thought about what are those other touch points that employers would want to have their employees have access to, or what their channel strategy might be that may be slightly different technology than you're using, and built those connectors in. So I want to keep you going. I don't want to keep you off track, but thought that was
no worries.
Really, really great nuance that you were pointing out.
Thanks. Yeah. So, and that is a key point. And the kind of third thing that comes out there is, one thing that kept coming up again when we were working with different departments was that each department had underlying goals that they wanted an onboarding employee to either complete or engage with. That's not necessarily something that's mandatory. It may be from a more employee engagement perspective. You may be a communicator and say, look, I'm running this really great webinar this week, and it'd be really great to get onboarding employees into that webinar early on, get engagement, so they really see and they see the effort we're putting in, the types of events that we run in the company. And so these are examples of onboarding goals that we saw that kept coming up. And so from a technology perspective, we wanted to provide communicators and HR managers the ability to set different types of content goals, as it were, for their onboarding employees, and then be able to track what was the level of engagement with them. And then they could say, okay, well, this type of webinar didn't really resonate with onboarding employees. We know that this event did. And so back to our point around agility, being able to kind of fine tune that onboarding experience, because you can see these were our goals. This had good engagement. This didn't have such good engagement. And so you can start to see themes, and you might actually start to put trends around certain departments prefer different types of content. And so you really start to see how it isn't a one size fits all. And likewise there as well, obviously the onboarding journey is a journey. So being able to kind of track progress to see where are people in that sequence, ultimately what was the level of engagement, how can we improve that? And lastly, before I go into the demo, for those of you that are more familiar with the kind of onboarding journey, this is kind of what we mapped out. Now, this is, for the purpose of the presentation, obviously a simplification. Those that have worked close to onboarding know it's much more complex than a few words on a slide. But I just wanted to highlight here that what the common themes are that we identified for kind of our onboarding activities. So if we just start for argument's sake from week one, we found out that week one really does need to be dedicated to those kind of more mandatory activities and tasks. That is a core element because they have to be done at those early stages in order for them to progress and get really stuck in to the department and their role in the kind of later weeks. But at the same time, of course, you don't want your first week to be boring, and that's why also trying to ensure that that employee is ultimately introduced to the business, that they have an opportunity to contribute, understand what the business does as well. Week two, we've got kind of the theme for week two and for our onboarding employees is around cultural immersion. So we start to then seep in like different types of cultural events, social events, and the sorts of things like people registering for webinars, in-person events, mingling events and social events between onboarding employees, things like meeting your onboarding buddy, encouraging people to schedule time for them, these sorts of things, but also getting them to start to learn a bit more about the Unily, like the system onboarding, making use of the functionality so that they're making best use of their the technology and best use of their employee experience. Now, being a product company, the third week is quite unique to us. And of course, this will be different for different organizations, but we're kind of a product first company. And we expect all of our kind of roles, departments to have a kind of base level of understanding of our product and the value we add to our customers. And so week three for us is really all about getting everyone to a good baseline level on our product. So we've got training sessions set up, upskilling in certain areas. We also use the platform for quizzes and things like that. And then from week four onwards, it's kind of like a slow transition into that kind of functional takeover. So for in this example, we've got sales and their activities, making sure that they have access to the templates that they need, Salesforce, these sorts of things. Now, of course, this will be different for different organizations, but for me, the thing to take away from this is that's agnostic, is that there's this kind of, over time, you've got this gradual building up. So we start off with only kind of critical information, documents, things that need to be done. Over time, you're building up knowledge of your company culture, your business, your product and your role, as for it not to be overwhelming. Because quite often, if you just list what needs to be done or what your aims are and try to fit it all into 1-2 weeks, it's not really done in a smooth way. And so what we wanted was that the employee kind of gradually builds up confidence and gets introduced to new concepts over time so that it's not overwhelming.
Well, and I think you're going to show this, but this also gives you kind of a view in, if you're doing this in a coordinated effort, to how much the employee is receiving, right? Because if everything's happening in a silo, if HR is sending communications via one mechanism and has a list of things for you to do, and then your manager has a different list of things for you to do, and IT has a third list, and so on and so on, it quickly becomes overwhelming to the employee. And how do they prioritize? And if they don't have sort of that master checklist or a well thought out cadence of communications coming to them.
Sure, and you'll exactly that, and you'll see from some of the language that's used as well, embedding this kind of structure when there's so much new information in your first, like in this example, first month. There's so much new information. Embedding that kind of consistency and structure alongside those aims just helps the onboarding employee understand how they're making progress and not feel overwhelmed as well. Great, so I am just going to...
Yeah, so let's see it in action.
So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So we're no longer looking at the presentation.
We're all joining the rock stars company because we're all rock stars.
Excellent. Yeah, exactly. Which is so Rockstars is our intranet. So of course, other intranet brands do exist. But yeah, Rockstars is our one because we funny story actually from our founders who a big fan of Rockstars, but also we kind of are Rockstars, so our intranet is Rockstars. And from
That's
our old
awesome.
name,
I thought it
Brightstar
was
as
a
well.
demo. I thought it was a demo site.
Oh no,
Fake
this
name,
is
but it's
actually
the real deal.
This is our
Okay.
demo. This is all our branding, all the content is kind of re-replicated, but we've basically taken out the real like obviously the sensitive information and data
Right,
just
to
to kind of protect the individual.
innocent,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So you see here, for example, you see I'm not Elizabeth Boyd, not during the week anyway. And so you see here like this is an example when Elizabeth logs in on day one. We actually have this is kind of the landing page, right? So it's personable, it's clear that it's new, it's not overwhelming, so we're not providing like loads of content straight away. And again, you've got clear call to actions, which for us is, you know, we said early on we want our employee to learn a bit about the company, we're kind of actioning that, but really for us it's about completing mandatory content. So in our organization, that comes down to the employee handbook. We've got like ISO accreditation, part of our ISO accreditation. We have to ensure employees understand different elements of that, and that has to be done ASAP. And the same with kind of global data protection stuff.
Okay, so I want to pause for just a minute
Yeah,
because I
let's
want to
pause.
make sure that people are tracking with what I think I'm hearing. So when I join Unily on my first day, when I'm Elizabeth, I log in to the intranet and this is what I see. I don't see a page with company news and you know, assuming that I know what's going on. I'm presented with this page, and then I have the ability, presumably, to go to that other homepage that everyone else has. Is that, am I reading that right?
That's correct. For those that are a bit more techy, the what's going on in the background is that we and this happens across our organization all the time. We have different kind of target audiences that we set up for different purposes. So we have a target audience for our kind of week one starters, and the value of that is it means you get essentially a targeted homepage. So when you log in, it understands kind of your unique fingerprint, where you are in your journey, what department you're in, and we have the ability to kind of segment your experience purely based on that. And that's why what I'm seeing now is obviously I'm not in my week one at Unily, but that's how we set up our experience. Because
well, you're not Elizabeth either,
and
but
I'm
we're
not
playing
Elizabeth
along.
either. Yeah.
Okay, quick other clarifying question from Catherine in the chat is this accessible pre-day one, or do you have a different access point for pre-day one?
So interestingly for us, we actually so we also have a customer community portal using Unily technology as well, and on that we have different information. It gives them access to kind of learn ahead a bit about the product. The short answer is this particular page, no, because there's some information on there that we want to do as part of day one. However, pre-boarding, they do have access to a portal with pre-boarding activities and information, which is a Unily portal. We do actually have customers as well that use it for like use the same site for pre-boarding.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
And so what we've got in our kind of week one experience here is essentially what we're trying to do is get those things out of the way quickly so that they can get straight into essentially the more fun stuff, or as I see, the more fun stuff. And then we've got kind of a teasing in of like a message from our CEO establishing that the leadership straight away. And what you'll notice here as well is that the ability for them to, and you'll see this actually consistent between the homepage on weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, there's always an opportunity to provide ad hoc feedback at any point. So I may be having a great day one. I can say, you know, I'm really enjoying my time. Great day one. kind of submit that feedback. So anytime people can kind of HR, communications, leadership can access that and say, okay, well, great, that's going well, and kind of feedback into the process with the refresh as well. They'll have an opportunity to feedback again the next day and the next day. So it may be get to the Friday and be like, oh, do you know what? I've generally had a great week, but there's a bit of information that I missed, and so I can feed that back as well. So that's kind of our week one, and then we're getting a bit tight with time, so I'll try and speed up a little bit. So onto our kind of week 2 homepage. Remember, going back to our presentation, we said week 2 is much more about that cultural immersion, ensuring that people feel connected to the company. And so what we see here is that also it's quite clear, you know, you're on week 2 of onboarding, the employee feels like they're making progress. And we've done our mandatory activities, so now we are showing our cultural values. We also said that now that they've spent a week, they've got in the platform, they probably understand the purpose of the platform. Now let's try to help them get use out of that platform, encourage them to personalize with specific applications and tools that they might need to use for their role. Start to see any cultural events that are going on, so like learning about our values. They can attend a webinar there, so you see there again the cultural things are starting to come through. And on the point around providing feedback, again, what we've got here is the pulse survey for week 2. Again, the ability to provide feedback for their experience on week 2. So if you're looking at this from a blank slate, you've essentially got an opportunity. You may find, okay, we smashed week 1 out of the park, really positive feedback from our employees, we got everything we needed to get done. Maybe we didn't put enough events on in week 2 for the cultural connection activity, so you can start to break down that feedback in a manageable way and improve your onboarding experience in that way as well. And in our week 3 homepage, and remember we said this is really for us as a company, being a product company, we want everyone to have a good baseline knowledge of our product. What we're doing here is to say, okay, well, this is your week 3 of onboarding. We're all in the same boat. Let's get on board with the product, access our community platform. Here's some training videos that you have access to, bringing in some of the elements for consistency from the week before. And as you start to go through those training videos, you can also like test your knowledge as well, kind of like fill in a quiz, understand about, you know, what are Unily stories, where do you create audiences in? We kind of referenced those earlier. So you see that as an example there. So what we've got here is kind of week 3 of onboarding. And in terms of the kind of automation side of it, so I've just shown you a kind of teaser of the type of content, and I've shown you the 3 different homepages for different parts in that journey. But ultimately, how do we ensure that that employee is accessing, is engaged, is attending different things, is actually making use of the resources that internal teams have put the effort together to provide? And that's where the kind of automation part comes in. And so what you see here is our automation technology, engagement automation technology. And this here shows you the timeline that is planned out, which pushes out communications at critical times. So you see here on day 1, we've got that homepage going live for that week 1 homepage, to ensure it's live. We've got the welcome email. We know from day 1, firstly, you need to know you've got a central portal, a platform. So people are used to emails and platforms. So we know sending out an email, getting them onto that platform straight away, 9 a.m. is done. And then we start to send out notifications through different channels. We've also here, we've got an example of what we call like a conditional notification to say, okay, well, it's got to day 2. We might have noticed that some employees that haven't filled in some critical stuff that they needed to do. So what we do here is we essentially send out a kind of follow-up notification, which basically, so you see it's got a conditional audience, and it only nudges those that haven't done it yet. And likewise, as we start to get further into the journey, so we're still in week 1 here, getting people involved with social, it gets to the Friday. If they haven't filled in the feedback, we want to push them to fill in feedback. Getting into week 2, they get a notification with the cultural events. They get a personalized newsletter. So we've encouraged them to put in their personalization preferences. And after they've done that, they basically get an email saying, hey, we saw that you filled in your personalization preferences. Here's your first email. Take an account for all of that. And then you kind of see, as we get into kind of week 3 here as well, the different types of content. And what essentially happens is that our internal teams have access to this technology to plan out this timeline, right? So they can look at this timeline and say, okay, well, this is what my onboarding experience, I want it to look like. I want this to happen on day 1, on day 2. And you may find that over time, okay, well, actually sending out a nudge on day 2 was too early. Let's change it to a different day. And so you can then reorganize your timeline as well, which is really great. And so you see here, what you've got is an automated execution of activities, different types of communications as well. So it's not just about sending notifications. You've got your email, you can post to, we have an onboarding social channel as well. So if you're an onboarding employee, you can basically ask questions to either onboarding buddies or HR or even other onboarding people. And again, someone asked earlier, I know, about integrations. We said here that like the ability to send out notifications into different channels for different purposes. So where we send out culture notifications, getting people to register for cultural events, socials, we tend to send those through Microsoft Teams because we know that's the right place for them. Whereas if it's a more like business critical notification, then it might come directly through the mobile app or through email, as an example. So I've seen a lot of questions coming through. So
yes, there are a lot of questions, but I do want to make sure that we have enough time to see sort of the full demo, if you will. But just quickly, and so for those of you who are on the call, hopefully you can continue on for our optional overtime where we can get into some of these more detailed questions. But in relationship to this timeline, so, you know, obviously it looks linear on the back end. But there was a question about that front end web page for the new employees. You know, if they're in week 1, can they, if they've gone through the things they need to do they have the ability to get to sort of the everybody's homepage with the news and information? Can you skip ahead, so to speak, or do you have to follow this linear page that's presented to you?
It really depends on what you want. So it's possible. Yes. So it's all kind of based on how we set up our target audiences, whether you make certain areas private, things like that. For us, kind of personally, there's we like on our homepage there's access to certain information. Well, there's nothing from a security perspective that we don't show, but I know some organizations that I've worked with kind of like ensure that until the mandatory reads have been done, they don't have access to the kind of full fat version, just because there's other information behind there that either they shouldn't access, or like in our case, sometimes we didn't want to overwhelm. Like there's a lot of news out there, and ultimately in week 1 for us, we defined that it's about those mandatory activities and business understanding. So there's so much on our platform, we didn't want it to be everything.
Right.
And so it's kind of more refined walkthrough type experience, but that's definitely not the case for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to make sure, we have a few more minutes until the top of the hour. Were there other demo things you wanted to show us before we get too far into questions?
Let's continue going the questions. I think I'm sure that will kind of guide us through some extra points as well. I'm sure. Let's get through the questions.
So there was one question regarding language and whether or not this could be customized for different languages.
For sure, yeah. So and that's actually, it's an interesting question as well, because that's part of the setup activity. So I mentioned earlier that people put their personalization preferences, and part of that is around language preferences as well. So I will be able to kind of update my language. Obviously, it depends on what languages your organization wants to support. But yes, it's a short answer.
And in terms of that language support, do you have translation capability within Unily, or do organizations have to translate content manually?
So we have both capabilities. So we have we leverage Azure Translation, Microsoft Translation services. So especially with some of our small clients, that we know it can be quite resource intensive to manually translate a lot of content, and well, both from a time and money perspective. So a lot of our customers leverage auto translation, machine translation, and will write it in one language and machine translate it to another, except maybe for like business critical comms, which have to be in the specific language, or they get manually translated. But at the same time, you can also manually translate content. So let's have a look at an example. If I look at an example, news item. So you can see here I have the ability, so the source language is English US, and I can choose to translate it into some of the languages that I set up. Alternatively, I can actually kind of flip to that language and paste something in manually as well, if required.
Fantastic. Oh, and someone just chimed in. That just answered my question. I love it. All right, so I'm feeling like I'm straddling between the getting us to the top of the hour for those folks who I know aren't going to be able to stay, and getting into some deeper topics for those who are going to stay. Nancy, from the chat, is there one quick question or clarification maybe on this demo that Kaz has just done that we could answer before we kind of have people drop and then we get into a little bit of a deeper conversation?
Yeah, I thought it would be great to bring in Carrie from Estee Lauder for her question.
Carrie.
Hi.
Hi.
We use Unily and we love it here at Estee Lauder Companies. And I think one of the things we wanted to know is how many different homepage variants are you supporting with this, right? And are there any, if there's a lot, how do you handle the keeping track of it all?
So because of our kind of scale at the moment, there's probably less than you guys might need. But so we've got about, I think we actually have a couple of different. So there are also some niche cases outside of onboarding, by the way. For example, people on the board have a slightly different experience. So I think in total, maybe we have 6 around that. So it makes it kind of fairly easy to manage. Also, they're not like these onboarding ones, for example, aren't changing kind of day in, day out. So obviously there's a process now in place to kind of ensure that things are being updated on a regular basis, but that's not a kind of a daily occurrence. So it's not too difficult to manage, but this is obviously from a technology perspective, engagement automation is fairly new to us as well. So we are kind of getting to grips with it and trying to work out the best way that we kind of improve that, get feedback on that, and make changes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie. So we are at the top of the hour. I do want to be mindful for those who are unfortunately not able to stay for the optional overtime. So for those of you who do need to leave, the recording of the session will be available and you'll receive an email from us letting you know when that's available. For those of you who are able to stay, fantastic. We're going to get in a little bit deeper. And we did have a few questions come through in the chat asking about that pre-boarding experience. And so we're winging it here, Kaz. Is the pre-boarding experience something that you can show us or talk a little bit more about?
So I can talk about it. I can't because it's on our computer. It's on our I can talk about it because I actually went through it myself. But so we basically have a customer community platform called Universe, and on that we have all of our customers, who have access to different types of features. They have like guides to get set up on stuff, some like training videos and webinars. We've got an ideation platform as an example. And so on that platform, we have different personas, as it were, for different types of experiences. So that includes our customers. So communicators get a certain experience, IT people get a certain experience, and pre-boarding people, when I went through this myself, got access to that platform as a way to basically get an early insight into the kind of company culture. So there's a social platform on there as well, so you can see, are people asking questions, what sort of questions are people asking about the product, what ideas do people have about the product. And there's also kind of like some mandatory reads on there as well. So like there's a couple of things that people have to kind of read and agree before they use that platform as well. And so I can't actually show it just because of some, like the information on it. But
yeah, technical question. How are, for Unily employees or for those customers who are, leveraging sort of this pre-boarding type of a platform, how are they authenticating these employees on? Are they having to create user accounts before they actually start with the company, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we can kind of invite, we can basically, obviously on our own platform, we have kind of authentication set up through our kind of normal channels through like Azure, but on the community platform, we can basically invite external people in, and they can register with, let's say, something like Facebook or Gmail or something, or LinkedIn, let's say. I think that's what I did 2 years ago or something like that.
Okay. All right. So we have a question from, I hope I'm saying this right, Mirsad, saying, based on the success of the onboarding feature, is there an offboarding feature or process? They're thinking about turning in equipment, thanking them for their service, transitioning to any kind of retirement plans, et cetera. It's a well thought out question in terms of that other end of the process.
Good question, and it prompted me to realize that I didn't actually speak about the future plans when I planned to. But so the way we kind of ran this feature, funny enough, like when we first built this feature, it wasn't built specifically for onboarding. It was actually built for communication campaigns. And we noticed that, so we kind of ran a preview program with our customers. So there were like a handful of customers that said that they were interested in leveraging technology before it was kind of fully out there available. And we saw that people wanted to use it for onboarding. And as part of that, we want to make some adjustments so that it works even better for it. So like today, we could use it for offboarding using the same capability. Although yet we haven't yet internally, but there's a couple of things we want to implement that make it a bit more suitable for that. One of them is around providing like a manager dashboard that complements the automation part of it. So you could say like, okay, I'm a manager and I've got a few employees onboarding. I want to be able to see which of my employees are onboarding, where are they in that journey, what content have they engaged with? Are there things that they should have done that they haven't done? And part of that is, which was kind of referred to in the question, was around a better way to get a view of essentially tasks, and whether they be onboarding tasks, offboarding tasks, and kind of making that more part and parcel as part of the builder experience. And that's kind of like where we're going for it. So at the moment, that's kind of literally what I'm working on. After I leave this call, is trying to like work out how we make the automation builder experience really wrap itself around for more diverse onboarding, offboarding experiences and other moments that matter as well.
You can start to think of so many different applications, whether it's leave return or going out on a leave, or transfers, as Mirsad pointed out.
Exactly. Transitioning
or
between departments.
offboarding, etc.
And so, we're trying to flesh out those scenarios. work out what the needs are of them. And one of them that came from onboarding was that we need to do more for that kind of relationship with the employee and the manager, whether that's kind of like being able to split paths and say send this communication to the employee at the same time send this one to the manager, as an example.
Well, and that kind of is a good jumping off point to a related question, excuse me, from Ed at CVS. He's wondering if this experience could be triggered based on the actual start date or a pre-scheduled campaign start date. Can you vary the campaign based on the employee potentially, depending on the process?
So we, I guess like one kind of prerequisite worth mentioning is that we have like our employee start date data firstly available and secondly kind of synced into our platform. And so that's kind of like a data requirement of being able to target some of these experiences. If you don't have that data, it doesn't make it impossible, but as part of that automation part, we kind of have these dynamic audiences that update based on that date. So it makes it much more of a smoother process. Sorry, what was the actual question again?
Oh, just if there's the ability to have the campaigns trigger, like if you're doing pre-start, obviously you're going to be sending to a different email address most likely than if once they're in the door.
Right. So what we can basically do is this isn't a demo site, but actually I think I might have an example.
And Ed, feel free to come off of mute if I'm not representing your question.
Oh, it's Ed. Hi, Ed.
So my main question was, because the last screen we saw was the timeline screen, so it looked like you could just kind of start and end this onboarding process based on a fixed date. So I was curious if you could actually tie it to the individual's start date, so this whole sequence, kicks off at different times based on when you actually start. Because it looked like you could only start it at a definitive date.
Yeah, so what we're doing at the moment is we've basically got to target audiences for like dynamic target audiences based on those dates, and then creating like different journeys and enrolling them. But as part of the improvements that we're currently making, it will be like you'll be able to make it more dynamic so that each individual employee is could essentially be at like a different hour in the journey, if that makes sense.
So that's coming.
That's coming, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, related to data and start dates, we have a question from Sandra about integration with Workday. And Sandra, do you want to come off of mute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, this is Sandy. As I was scrolling through the chats, I just hadn't seen anybody ask it specifically. So I was just curious if you have a full integration with Workday.
All right,
and a full integration with ServiceNow. I did see somebody else ask about different integrations, but I didn't see Workday. And
ServiceNow is a yes, and it's kind of a big part of, it's probably actually one of our most successful integrations in terms of adoption as well, kind of like displaying incident service requests. Workday is trickier, mainly from a kind of API perspective, which is obviously the boring part, but we basically offer a kind of like a partnership program where like if it's at the top of our list of integrations that we want to build a full integration with. But if you're a current customer, by the way, or no?
We're not.
Because if you are, basically like we're looking to like partner with a customer to kind of build that integration at the moment, but it's kind of proving trickier than we've first anticipated, just due to more from the Workday side. There's not as much as we would like to make a really high value integration. That's not, but it is still our top priority.
Thank you.
And Kaz, we have a few more questions. Phyllis had to dash, but her question was, can content include any additional language information for new hires across the spectrum, or is that primarily done once somebody comes into the onboarding and not the pre-onboarding leg of the process?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. You've got this segmented notion of the onboarding process. So there's pre-onboarding and then there's the active onboarding. Can you support multi-language across the board throughout the process?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And can people flip back and forth between languages, or are they locked into one choice?
Yeah, no, so you can kind of switch at any point. Of course, it's kind of we have some organizations that are kind of like truly multilingual and fully support that and have local editors which ensure that there's content in different languages. Others, especially more smaller organizations, won't necessarily kind of offer that, but essentially from a user perspective, they can change language at any point. So, and change back and forth, and sometimes I do it if I'm like trying to learn French or something, and just to like test my knowledge. But yes, you can.
Good to know. And then just tying in this theme to a podcast that we had done last year with the World Bank, one of the things that they spotlighted as part of their end-to-end process was the importance of the social connections. So there are the structured onboarding activities that you talked about in terms of those must-dos that people need to have in place to get functional. But one of the things that really makes a difference, especially for mid-career hires, is starting to establish that network. And of course, looking at the window of the pandemic working that we're starting to come out of in a lot of ways, that was one of the biggest challenges, those social connections. Can you talk a little bit about how that may play into the experience here?
Yes. So, well, at Unily, like we have like quite an active social community, which makes it easier because once you've got the momentum going, you're kind of missing out if you're not on board the train. But so like one of the ways we do that from an onboarding experience is like we have kind of leadership buy-in, and you can actually do that as part of campaigns, as part of the technology as well. You can basically, we know one of the biggest barriers of like getting, let's say, leadership involved in social, because once people start seeing leadership getting involved, then they're like, okay, well, now it's a thing. And so one thing you can do as part of the technology is basically, if you're in that situation and struggling to get leadership involved, you can basically like pre-agree a message and agree to kind of post on behalf of that leader as part of a campaign to, let's say, post into the onboarding social channel to say like, hey, everyone, welcome. This is our social channel. Glad to have you on board. If you want to like ask questions, there's buddies in the onboarding channel. Alternatively, all HR managers have access as well. So like, feel free to get involved in the community. And we actually do like one of the ways we built momentum on social was obviously being a product company is when our internal employees have questions about the product, like how does it work, does it do this, then all of that is channeled through our social channel, and so that like automatically gives it a strong like bit of momentum and means that people essentially have to be on that platform. Of course, there are different ways to build momentum for different organizations, and different companies have different cultures which make the challenges different, but our social platform is a big part of both us as a company, but also we build it in as part of onboarding through the onboarding social channel.
And I know you showed that there was integration with the Microsoft stack and with Slack in terms of social, but is there also, if a company doesn't use Slack or Teams as an example for sort of a social gathering place, is there capability within the Unily platform to have like commenting on news or create affinity groups, or do you need to integrate with third-party platforms to enable that?
Oh yeah, no. So we have our native capability as well. So you can see here a couple of examples of the integrations, like the Teams one, Slack, Zoom. But if I look at an example of content, we're kind of leveraging this kind of health and safety update. We've got our native ability to engage with it. So we've got like different social reactions. And then we have our kind of native social function here as well. So you can see people are commenting here. This is obviously at our site, but you see people are commenting here. So employees don't necessarily need access to a third-party platform like Yammer or Slack or something like that to leverage it.
And Kaz, if you can stay on that screen for just a moment, we'll have Rose spotlight it because she had the spotlight on you.
Okay.
So we can see it, but it's small. It's just in the film strip right now because we need Rose to switch it back.
I'll go through some of the like interactions again.
I've got it up on my screen at the moment, so I'm not sure if there's a different view for you. Now I've got Kaz on screen.
Oh, should I exit Spotlight?
Yeah, we can do that. One sec.
That better?
Just waiting for it to come on screen.
What is it that you're looking to get on screen?
The
screen sharing.
Yeah, Kaz's desktop.
Okay.
And is it on the screen? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing it. Well, and maybe if people could click into
I'll try and do
the
something
window.
like interactive.
Yeah. So this is a news article that you're showing?
Yeah, so this is a news article. So you can see here, like, I can actually like share this to social. I could share it to the onboarding channel and be like,
So this is using the embedded social within the platform.
that's right, yeah. So, and then there's like interactions. So this might be a critical update for me. So I might like follow the item to see if there are any updates to it. I may choose to kind of like copy the link and share it offline. And then you see here, we've got like the native social capability where people are interacting with the content item. It might be worth it actually is.
That's great. Nancy, do we have other questions that were in the queue that we weren't able to get to during the main hour?
Yep, give me 1 second. I'm scrolling back up to Nora Lambert's. She had the following question. Do employees have an overview of the content that's going to be coming their way if they're at a specific stage or week of the onboarding process? And can they also go back in time if they want to revisit something?
So we do, you can, so currently there is a way to do that using some of our widgets, but we want to, so if you remember earlier, I mentioned like a manager dashboard. What we want to do is kind of build a corresponding employee dashboard that surfaces that. It's funny because when we worked with some of the preview program participants on this, there was quite conflicting views from some of our customers as to whether they would want employees to be able to do that or not. Obviously, it's all like it's all a choice, nothing's forced. But in some of the early stages, we decided that like it's something we do later on, and kind of invest a bit more in like the analytics as an example. But yeah, so in kind of short, there is an ability to do that using some of our widgets. So you can show the employees things that they've engaged with. They can go back to things that they previously engaged with. But it's in our plan to kind of put it in an experience that helps an employee map their journey out a bit more. These are the things I just checked. These are the things that I've got coming up. So if they really want to take control of their journey and get ahead of the game, then they can.
That's
Sounds good.
great. So we've got another question that just came in from Jennifer Hastings, and they were wondering if Unily integrates with other content management systems like Adobe Experience Manager, or does it produce standalone site pages managed separately from a broader digital workplace?
So we have our own, like Unily as a platform is kind of our own content management system. We do integrate with different types of systems for different purposes, but we essentially you'll see here that we are kind of hosting all different types of content in here. So we've got news, events, like media, like audio and video, forms, company applications and tools.
Do you maybe have a demo site that you could show the homepage of what
Yes.
you know, the instead, because we've been looking at the onboarding experience, but what does the, sort of typical day-to-day intranet look like? All those Nielsen Norman Award winners.
I would get one set up in the background.
And Jennifer, hopefully that answered your question. Feel free to come off of mute if you had further clarifying.
No, I think it does. I would be curious. So I imagine, so this seems like it's sort of, it can be, so a broader internet can potentially serve Unily's onboarding experience as the first, as the entry point for employees. But I guess sounds to me like it is standalone from the rest of of a site. Is that the right understanding? So for instance, Kaiser Permanente, we manage our intranet through Adobe Experience Manager. We do integrate with lots of other applications, but we have templates and all sorts of content developed there. But this sounds like anything around the onboarding experience would be managed in Unily's content management. Is that true?
Oh, okay. So like onboarding, can you give me an example of
well, the pages that you're showing here.
Oh,
so yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Yeah.
Correct. So obviously this is a slightly different experience that we've got here, which is kind of a bit more news and communications focused. So it's also so this is kind of making use of our recommendation engine. So kind of recommending content to the user based on either things they previously engaged or reacted with. It might be things that are popular in their particular network. This is an example of reward and recognition technology. So the ability to give kudos, so peer-to-peer recognition. Apparently
that integrates
one recently.
Apologies for interrupting. Is
that
integrated with other systems that are already part of the enterprise, or is that I just
already
curious?
Native?
Yeah.
So it's already part of the platform.
I see.
And so although we do have an example of an integration on this page, so this is an integration with Microsoft To Do. So if you're either creating tasks in Outlook or Planner or To Do, they've got loads of task applications. And so you can either pop it out into the full To Do application if required, but kind of for your quick day-to-day, see what tasks you've got that day, then you can kind of interact with them here, create a quick task.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you.
This isn't an example of an integration, of course, but and we do have other integrations in that suite. So like Microsoft, Google, ServiceNow, Salesforce. There's someone I'm thinking of that kind of expenses.
Do you have a ServiceNow example that you could show?
I do, although you're testing my knowledge of where it might be.
Tap dancing.
I don't have my so actually, do you know what I can do is might be able to show an example of it. In platform. So these are kind of like there's like a general search, like a search across the ServiceNow knowledge base. This one's a bit more interesting, I think, which is the like my incidents roll up. So
So you could see all of the tickets that you've submitted.
Correct. So like this obviously personal to the user. They can either like see what tickets they've got in ServiceNow. They can raise an incident, start searching if you've got multiple tickets. Hopefully you don't have too many. Or of course like view all and that kind of take you out into the ServiceNow app as well.
Great. Wow, we've
That's an
covered a
example.
lot.
Yeah, we have.
We're almost at the bottom of the hour to close out our overtime. So I do want to thank you so much for your time, Kaz. This was fascinating. I think back to 90 minutes ago where we started our journey, pun intended, in sort of just thinking about this bigger picture of the Great Resignation and ensuring there's not the great regret, and how you put yourselves under the microscope. You did user research and you were agile within your organization to create technology that's now within a product that other organizations can use. Really, really great discussion, Kaz. Thank you again to you and the team at Unily, and for everyone who participated. We had such an active chat and Q&A. And Nancy, thank you so much for joining me. Any last thoughts from you?
I think we covered a lot of territory today. So, of course, it's always important to say that we'll be sharing a selection of the resources that we provided during the chat recordings, both for guests and members alike. And of course, if you'd like us to make a connection back to the Unily team, I've just shared the events mailbox, so we'll happily do that. It looks like we answered most of the questions.
I think we did.
We've got just one that was lingering, but we'll make sure that we get that information to the ELC team post haste as well.
Fantastic. Rose, any last minute technical items before we close out for people?
Actually, we have a survey, so I'm just going to pop that into the chat. And if you are able to give us your thoughts, that would be really, really helpful. So let me just get that for you as well.
Fantastic. And Nancy, I'm not seeing the email in the chat.
Yeah, it's in chat.
My chat's not keeping up.
Yeah, I think Teams is going through some updates in the background in the meantime, so some things are posting on delay, but looks like there's quite a lot that's come through since I posted the message.
Great. And I do see the survey link there. Thank you, Rose. So thank you everyone for participating. Have a great day, and we'll hope to see you at our next event.
Thank you.